Ubisoft have been firing on all cylinders in this golden quarter. Admittedly, I wasn't overly interested in Immortals Fenyx Rising. Like most, I saw it as a hybrid between Ubisoft Montreal's Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Nintendo's Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and thought that it wouldn't really bring anything original to the table. So I considered not covering it, especially with it being sandwiched in between Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Cyberpunk 2077, which are both arguably the biggest releases of this year, with 50-hour plus campaigns. But with my Assassin's Creed review completed slightly ahead of schedule, I decided to reach out to Ubisoft to see if I could get a review copy, to which they sent me just before release. So big shout out to Ubisoft press team for supplying me with copies of the game. I'm extremely humbled, and I hope you guys really appreciate my review. With Ubisoft's new cross-save facility now in place, I've played Immortals Fenyx Rising on both Nintendo Switch and Xbox Series X, and with about 20 hours racked up in the game, I'm ready to give my verdict. If you're new to the channel, make sure to drop a comment and subscribe, and don't forget to check out my new Instagram too, where I drop daily screenshots from the games I'm covering. I'm TJFL, and this is my review of Immortals Fenyx Rising. Immortals is a light-hearted comedic take on Greek mythology. The story is told and narrated by the Greek gods Zeus and Prometheus. The villain of this story is Typhon, who after spending years in imprisonment manages to escape and take his revenge on the Olympian gods by severing them of their godly powers and form. Zeus seeks help from Prometheus to tackle Typhon, but instead of jumping to Zeus's aid, Prometheus uses his power of foresight to tell the tale of Fenyx, a mere mortal shipwrecked among the Golden Isles. After this brief introduction to the world and plot, you are thrust into the shoes of Fenyx, and you are tasked by one of the Olympian gods, Hermes, to set out amongst the Golden Isles and free the other Olympian gods of their captivity and restore them to their full potential so that they can defeat Typhon. Despite this game being about gods and monsters, the way in which the gods are portrayed in this story are incredibly comedic, and each have truly interesting characters which are full of life and tongue-in-cheek jokes. Add in the constant arguing back and forth between Zeus and Prometheus as you traverse the world, and this is probably one of the most entertaining and funniest games I've played, but it never came off as overly silly or cringy. The character development of each of these gods and Fenyx is probably some of the best we have seen in a Ubisoft game, and the way that it's all woven into Greek mythology is brilliant. If you have no prior knowledge of Greek mythology, this is actually a really good way to gain insight into that world, but in a video game, despite being a relatively simple plot. I enjoyed the much more condensed and light-hearted narrative of Immortals to some of the more complex and mature stories of other AAA games. So let's get the elephant out of the room. Yes, this game draws a lot of inspiration in its visual design to Zelda. But the world of the Golden Isles is vastly different to Zelda, and I never felt plagued by a sense of familiarity while traversing the world. There are 7 distinct regions in the world which are inspired by the Greek gods of the main story arc. Each region has its own visual style and art direction that sets it apart from the other regions. The game constantly invites you to explore all of its crevices, and while you're venturing on the main quest, you will always be drawn to unique points of interest. Unlike Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which this game does draw some parallels to, being that it is the same development studio, the map doesn't feel bloated with vast empty spaces. The world of Golden Isles is fairly condensed, and you rarely ever find yourself wandering amongst nothingness. Aggression is woven very heavily into the exploration of the Golden Isles. Akin to another game from Ubisoft, when Felix explores a new region, Immortals first tells you to climb to a high vantage point, normally a statue of the god of that area, to survey your surroundings. From the top of your vantage point, you can then scan the area to see points of interest. These points of interest range from hidden chests and musical lyres, to rocks of ambrosia used to upgrade health, and Tartarus vaults where you will find Zeus's lightning to upgrade your stamina. Once you are set on which area you are wanting to tackle, simply jump off your vantage point and glide to your objective with your wings, which you get fairly early in the game. Similar to the map design and story, the side content is fairly condensed, and you never feel swamped with icons or overwhelmed with things to do. This is something that Ubisoft are really getting good at in their open world games, and it makes the core gameplay loop so much more inviting. My favourite piece of side content are the Tartarus Vaults. When you enter a Tartarus Vault, you are sent into the Netherrealm, and you have to complete a multitude of environmental puzzles to gain access to Zeus's lightning. I found these puzzles really fun, and at times they really baffled me and had me really having to think outside of the box as to how to get to the next area. If you played a lot of these sort of puzzle games, then this might be a walk in the park for you. But for me, this felt really fresh and challenging, but still incredibly rewarding by the end of it that I couldn't help but try and complete all the puzzles. Once you have collected enough resources to upgrade your stats or gear, you can return to the Hall of Gods, which is the area where you can then upgrade your key abilities and armour with these awesome little cutscenes showing Fenyx upgrading that particular skill set. Combat for me is where Immortals lost a few marks. Being from the same studio that made Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I found the combat very spongy and repetitive, with it becoming extremely tedious fairly early on in my playthrough. Like Odyssey, you rely on a mixture of light and heavy attacks to bring down an enemy's health and stun bar, constantly dodging out of the way of all of their attacks as you wait for your power meter to build up so you can use your godlike abilities to take a large portion of the enemy's health. And this is pretty much the same rinse and repeat loop for every enemy type throughout your entire playthrough. Yes, you can upgrade your attacks and abilities, but I found the upgrades very minute, only adding an extra 2 swings on the end of a light attack, or slowing down time when you dodge. Now it's not as bad as Assassin's Creed Odyssey, as you are fighting these fable-like creatures in a cartoonish style, so I can suspend my disbelief at these creatures surviving as many swings as I throw at them. But it still doesn't change the fact that it's just boring and tedious. You also only have 2 main melee weapons, which are your axe and sword. You can pick up different variants throughout your entire playthrough, but I never found the differences distinct enough. And Fenyx had the same animations regardless, so they never felt like an upgrade. Some people really enjoy this type of gameplay, and it is much more common now in video games, especially RPGs and MMOs. But I still think it's a lackluster experience. Assassin's Creed Valhalla had a lot of similar traits, but every enemy in Valhalla you could put down within a few strikes, and there were ways to be able to even down the strongest enemy in one strike if you played your cards right. Immortals also equips you with a bow. I found the bow really underpowered, and as much as I tried investing all my resources into the bow, it was never strong enough to kill most enemies in one hit, even with a headshot. This made using the bow pretty pointless, and I do hope they buff it with their future update. For some reason, this game incorporates stealth, but does a really bad job of it. Like, I don't even know why they put it in the game. So, like your typical open world game, you can crouch and hide in bushes, sneak up on an enemy, and then the commander will pop up to do a stealth attack. Only it's not a stealth attack, as it alerts all the nearby enemies, and it doesn't even guarantee a one-hit kill, thus making the stealth route completely redundant and a waste of time to try and carry out. I understand that most people won't pick up this game for its stealth mechanics, and even I came into this game not expecting any. But if you're going to put them in the game, at least make it functional instead of what feels like a last minute afterthought. The overall combat is very flashy and aesthetically pleasing, and for the first few hours it can be a blast. But definitely by the mid section of the game, if you aren't into the style of RPG combat, you're probably going to be pretty bored of it and find it very autonomous to carry out. So one quick side note I want to touch on before moving on to my final verdict is Ubisoft's new cross-save platform called Ubisoft Connect, and sees Ubisoft overhaul its original Ubisoft platform called Ubisoft Club into something that is much more intuitive and definitely a game changer for gaming across platforms going forward. As I said previously, I played Immortals on both Xbox Series X and Nintendo Switch. When I first heard that Immortals was coming to the Switch, I was concerned about performance, as this would be a 2020 release that was also available on next-gen hardware, and I just couldn't see how the Nintendo Switch could keep up. Well, Ubisoft definitely have some wizards working at their labs, as Immortals runs absolutely perfect on the Nintendo Switch, and it's probably my favourite first line release on the Switch since Zelda. Immortals consistently keeps a steady 30 frames per second, and although there is a noticeable muddiness to the textures when playing on the TV, in handheld mode this game looks amazing and definitely holds its own amongst other Nintendo titles. But as much as I can praise performance on the Switch, it's still not the best way to experience this game at its maximum potential and leaves you wanting more. That's where Ubisoft Connect comes in. Simply pause the game, upload your save file to the cloud, hop on your Xbox, download the save, done. Carry on as you were, but now in 60 frames per second at 4K with HDR. The graphics and visual design of Immortals on Xbox Series X is a real showcase for the potential of this hardware and really brings the colourful world of the Golden Isles to life. Being able to jump between both consoles was such a godsend for me, as when I was at home I could enjoy the game on my Series X, but when I had to go to work I could continue where I left off on my lunch break with a Nintendo Switch, which was not only incredibly time saving to get this review done as I had more time with the game, but really solidified the idea of the Nintendo Switch being a great companion piece of hardware to your primary console at home. What I would love to see Ubisoft do in the future to better promote this feature is perhaps offer a bundle where you can buy two of the same game but for different consoles at a discounted rate. If Ubisoft brought that in for Immortals, I would heavily advise any of you to jump on that, as it has really changed the way that I experienced and played this game. Immortals Fenyx Rising is actually a lot better than I thought it would be, and has exceeded almost all of my expectations. It actually really saddens me that this game was released in between Valhalla and Cyberpunk, as I worry it will probably go under most people's radars with all the noise surrounding these two titans. I wish Ubisoft had actually delayed the release date of this game so that it came out in January, so that it would have had more time to breathe and have some longer exposure and coverage than it has had so far. Had it have not been for this game's combat, this definitely would have been a game I'd recommend to everyone to play. But for the few people out there similar to myself who don't enjoy spongy combat, might find this game a chore at times to play, especially in the second half. This game has great character development, it has charm, and it has comedy, which never felt too on the nose or cringy. And although the story isn't something that's going to blow you out of the water, it's a fun journey that's a breath of fresh air from all the dark and gritty tales we've had recently, and the open world mixed with fun exploration keeps you wanting to come back to the Golden Isles. Immortals Fenyx Rising is a 7 out of 10. Hope you've enjoyed the review, guys. Make sure to have that notification bell on, and I'll see you in the next one.